The phone buzzed just as I was locking up my office for the night. I glanced at the screen. Grandpa. We hadn't spoken in weeks. Not since that uncomfortable dinner where he called my work a waste of energy and said I'd never amount to much because I was too soft. Still, I answered. His voice came through the line, dry and emotionless. "We're leaving tomorrow," he said flatly. "The beach house and your car. Sold. Farewell." Just like that. No explanation, no greeting, only a cold, surgical message. The kind of tone you'd expect from a bank clerk, not the man who helped raise you after your parents' accident. I didn't react. Not the way he probably hoped I would. No gasps, no begging, no shouting. Instead, I held the phone steady and said, "I understand." I let that sit for a second, then added, "But there's one thing you forgot." There was a pause on the line. I could hear him shift slightly, probably irritated that I wasn't breaking down or pleading. "What do you mean?" he asked, voice clipped, curious now. I didn't answer right away. I looked around my modest apartment. The neatly stacked papers on my desk, the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, the legal file peeking from the corner of my drawer, and I smiled. Not because I enjoyed what was coming, but because I had waited so long for this moment, and it had finally arrived. He thought he had taken everything from me. The house I grew up in, the car I bought with my own savings. He thought those things would break me, but he never imagined I'd be one step ahead. As I ended the call, I whispered, more to myself than him, "You really thought it was yours to sell." And that night, for the first time in months, I slept with peace on my chest, because he had no idea what storm was about to arrive. I was 17 when the world broke in two. One side held everything I had known, my parents, their laughter echoing through the halls of the beach house, Sunday mornings by the water, homemade breakfasts. The other side was silence. After the accident, I stood alone at the edge of that divide. Grandpa and his second wife, Marilyn, arrived a week after the funeral. He wore a dark suit and no grief. She wore pearls and a polite smile, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. "We'll just stay for a little while," she had said sweetly, brushing dust off a sofa that didn't belong to her. "Just until things settle." But they never left. What started as help turned into quiet occupation. Grandpa began handling all the documents. "Too much paperwork for a grieving boy," he had said. I didn't argue. I was still frozen in mourning, still staring at the door expecting my mother to walk through it, still setting 2 extra plates at dinner out of habit. Then came the first shift. "You should stay in the back quarters," Grandpa told me one evening, barely looking up from his newspaper. "It'll give us all space. You can move into the servant wing for now, until you prove you can stand on your own." He made it sound like logic, like it was some rite of passage. I didn't question him. I was tired, too tired to fight. So I took my things and moved into the tiny annex behind the house. The ceiling leaked. The mattress sank. The kitchen light flickered whenever I boiled water. But I stayed quiet. I complied. Because I thought, maybe if I keep the peace, they'll leave soon. But they didn't. Marilyn replaced the curtains with velvet. Grandpa converted the library into his home office. They started hosting friends, dinner parties with wine and seafood I wasn't invited to. I became a shadow in my own home, the boy who served tea and disappeared quietly afterward. One night, I overheard Marilyn laughing, his like a ghost, always lurking, but never saying anything. And she was right. I had become a ghost, but not the kind that fades, the kind that watches, learns, waits, and silently prepares for the moment the living forget who the house really belongs to. The beach house wasn't just wood and glass. It was breath and memory. My mother loved that place like it was an extension of her soul. She'd walk barefoot across the tiled floors, humming old songs as she opened every window to let the ocean breeze in. "A house should never feel trapped," she'd say. "Let it breathe, and it'll shelter you better than stone." I took my first steps in the living room. There's a small chip in the wood near the corner bookshelf from where I fell and cried into her arms. The kitchen still smelled faintly of cinnamon and clove, as if her hands had never stopped baking. On rainy days, we'd curl up by the wide glass windows and count the lightning strikes together. The house didn't just protect us, it knew us. After she died, it was all I had left of her. No jewelry could compare. No photograph could echo the warmth of that hallway. I never once thought of selling it. That house was Hayes, and therefore mine, a part of her legacy. But Grandpa walked through it like he owned the air inside. He placed heavy ashtrays on her antique tables, hung paintings that clashed with his soft palette, called the sunroom his den. He never asked, never acknowledged the house as his. Your parents left behind quite a mess, he'd mutter. Good thing I'm here to fix it. He had no legal claim to it. My mother bought the land before marrying my father, and the deed bore only her name. But I never brought that up. Not yet. Instead, I watched. I memorized how he placed his shoes near the door like a permanent resident. How Marilyn began referring to the master bedroom as our room. I took long walks through the house at night when they slept, running my fingers along the walls, whispering to the silence, "Don't worry. I'm still here." Because even as Grandpa poured scotch into my mother's favorite crystal and boasted to guess about his beachfront paradise, I knew the truth. He thought he'd inherited a structure, but he had trespassed into a memory. And memories, don't forget. While Grandpa played the role of Lord of the Manor, I played the role of ghost and guardian. At 19, I took a job delivering furniture during the day and washing dishes at a beachside diner by night. Every paycheck, no matter how small, went toward keeping the house standing. I paid the annual taxes, handled the repairs, and even hired a local plumber when the septic tank backed up. I never once asked Grandpa for a dime. He noticed, of course, but not in the way you hope an elder would. One evening, as I patched a leak on the garage roof, sweat running into my eyes, he stood below, sipping tea. "You've got a strange way of living," he said dryly. "Working yourself to the bone for things you will never really own. Too soft, just like your father." I didn't look down. I just kept hammering, the sound of each nail sealing something deeper than wood. What he didn't know was that I wasn't doing it for him. I was protecting something, keeping my mother's world alive. Quietly, faithfully, and in that silence, I found strength. I started reading at night, property law, inheritance statutes, municipal codes. It became an obsession. One day at the local records office, tucked in a dusty cabinet, I found it. The amendment my mother had filed 2 years before her death. A clause in her deed, notarized and official, stating that full ownership of the house, land, and all listed assets would transfer directly to me upon her passing. Not to my father, not to any extended family, just me, her only child. The document had never been contested. It was valid. It was binding. And I had it. I made a copy and stored the original in a safety deposit box under my name. I gave another to a lawyer, a friend of my mother's from years ago, who didn't hesitate when I asked for quiet legal support. I didn't confront Grandpa. Not yet. Instead, I let him walk through the halls like a king. Let him think I was small. Let him believe the silence meant surrender. Because while he mocked my softness, I was building an iron case in the dark. It was 2 years ago when I walked into the office of Mr. Ojiro, an aging lawyer with soft eyes and sharper instincts. My mother had once called him her legal backbone, and though they hadn't spoken in years before her passing, I remembered the name. His office smelled of old paper and lemon polish. I laid the documents out in front of him, my mother's deed, her handwritten amendments, and the notarized clause she had filed quietly, almost like a whisper to the future. He scanned them with a kind of focus that made time stand still. Then, slowly, he sat back in his chair and said, "This house is yours." I didn't speak. He continued, "Your grandfather has no claim. None. Not even through your father's line. Your mother kept it separate for a reason. And the clause is airtight. You're the sole legal heir." The words didn't bring joy. Not in that moment. Only weight. Confirmation of something I had long hoped and feared was true. "Has made himself comfortable," I murmured. Mr. Ojiro nodded, tapping the documents with one finger. "Then let him stay comfortable. The deeper the illusion, the harder the fall. You strike when he thinks is untouchable." It was the most ruthless advice I'd ever received, and the most accurate. Over the next few months, I followed his guidance to the letter. I filed quiet notifications with the registry, ensured the clause was digitally backed up and shielded from tampering. Any property-related decisions attempted without my consent would trigger an immediate freeze. But I told no one. I still took out the trash, still swept the porch after storms. When Grandpa tossed me his empty glass at family gatherings, I caught it without a word. I stayed invisible by design. Every move he made, every guest he welcomed, every remodeling decision he took pride in, was built on sand. Because the foundation of the house wasn't legal ownership. It was legacy, and that legacy had a name on it. Mine. Mr. Ojiro's final words still rang in my ears. Let him believe he owns the world, then show him the paperwork. And so, I waited, not out of fear, but out of strategy. Because storms are most powerful when the skies are calm. The house, once sacred, soon turned into a revolving door of strangers. Grandpa began renting out the guest rooms, quietly at first, a traveler here and there. But soon it became routine. Tourists arrived with rolling suitcases. Marilyn handed out towels like a concierge. They even had a laminated welcome sheet with a Wi-Fi password and house rules. I watched it all unfold from the servant quarters. The place he still insisted was more than enough for me. At first, I thought it would pass, that it was just a phase. But then he started boasting about the income. Beachfront property pays for itself. He chuckled to one of his weekend guests. The boy doesn't mind. He's got no real use for the place. Then came the real blow. One evening, I walked to the front drive and found an empty space where my car used to be. Confused, I rushed inside. "Where's my car?" I asked. Grandpa barely glanced up from his newspaper. "Sold it," he said. "Wasn't going anywhere. Just sitting there collecting dust. Consider it my payment for feeding you all these years." It took everything in me not to react. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't demand answers. Instead, I walked out, calmly, and documented the sale. I pulled up the registration, the ownership papers, the sale records. Every file, every signature. My lawyer had told me, let them dig their own grave. You just bring the shovel. The guests kept coming. I started taking photos. Dates, license plates, names. Quietly recording the stream of income Grandpa thought no one noticed. I began gathering receipts, screenshots, anything that showed he was profiting off something that was never his. Then, one afternoon, over dinner, he announced it. "We're leaving for Portugal next month," he said proudly. "Marilyn's always wanted a coastal life in Europe. With the money from the house, we'll be more than comfortable." He sipped from a glass of wine that had once belonged to my mother and added, "Finally done with this place. Sold it this morning. Got a great offer." Marilyn beamed beside him, already picturing cobbled streets and pastel rooftops. I smiled, too, for the first time that night. But not because I was happy for them. I smiled because he had just made the final move. And I had everything I needed. The phone rang again. Same time as before, same cold voice. "We're leaving tomorrow," Grandpa said, that signature arrogance lacing his tone. "The beach house and your car. Sold. Farewell." But this time, the story wasn't his to narrate. I sat alone in my apartment, lights low, the late sun casting a warm glow over the polished wood desk in front of me. Stacked neatly to my right were the official documents: title deed, freeze notice, proof of ownership, court-filed cease and desist. This time, I wasn't just a boy on the receiving end of bad news. I leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "I understand," I replied, voice calm, steady. Then I let it drop like a stone in water. "But there's one thing you missed." He paused. I imagined the frown tightening on his face. "What are you talking about?" But I didn't answer. Some truth deserved to arrive in person. Hundreds of miles away, in the beach house he'd sold with a smirk, the knock came at precisely 5:47 p.m. Grandpa opened the door to find two officers from the Real Estate Compliance and Fraud Division standing calmly on his porch. One of them held a printed file. The other wore the expression of someone who had done this before, many times. "Are you Mr. Gideon T. Clark?" the officer asked. "Yes," Grandpa said, squinting. "We're here regarding an illegal sale filed under your name. There appears to be an attempt to transfer ownership of a property you have no legal claim to." I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. I knew that look. The way Grandpa's jaw would clench when control slipped from his hands. The way he'd blink fast when caught off guard. "There's been a mistake," he'd say. "That house has been mine for years." But the officer would remain unmoved, holding up the certified deed. "According to the National Registry, this property is owned by your grandson. It has been since his mother's passing. The attempted sale is not only void, it's criminal." Back in my apartment, I stared out the window, watching the world go on, unbothered. And as Grandpa's world unraveled on the other side of the country, I whispered the words he had never expected to hear. "I told you, you forgot something." The beach house sale never went through. The beach house sale never went through. Not officially. The buyers, a well-to-do couple from Johannesburg, had been excited. They'd already wired the initial deposit and scheduled renovations. But just days before the transfer, they received a legal notice from my lawyer's office, pending litigation over ownership. "Do not proceed." Their agent panicked. Their lawyer intervened. And just like that, their trust vanished. The deal collapsed within hours. Grandpa, confused and furious, called the buyers demanding an explanation. Instead, he got a polite but firm response. "We don't engage in disputed properties, sir. Best of luck." Then came the freeze. The deed, held under my name through my mother's inheritance clause, had a legal lock placed on it nearly 6 months earlier. No sale, transfer, or financial activity involving the house could proceed without my express, notarized approval. That approval, of course, never came and never would. At the same time, the sale of my car, which he had conducted using falsified documents, triggered a second wave. The buyer of the vehicle, once informed of the forgery, had filed a complaint. The fund from that sale had gone directly into Grandpa's bank account, and now that account was flagged for investigation, unauthorized asset transfer and property fraud. Grandpa tried calling me. I didn't answer. He sent 2 emails, one apologetic, one furious. I opened neither. Meanwhile, authorities began circling. The Real Estate Fraud Division launched a formal inquiry. My lawyer had already submitted everything: statements, receipts, timestamps, the notarized will, even voice recordings of Grandpa boasting to guests about finally getting rid of that old place. He thought silence meant weakness, but in the background, every word he spoke had built my case. By the time the officers returned for a follow-up, Marilyn had packed a bag and left. She didn't want to be caught in the fallout. Grandpa stood alone in the house, stripped of bravado, staring at the reality he had long ignored. He hadn't just sold something that didn't belong to him. He had built his future on property that carried someone else's name. And now, the house, the money, the lie, all of it crumbled. Outside his window, the waves crashed calmly against the shore. The same shore where my mother once whispered to me, "Never let anyone mistake silence for surrender." She had no idea how right she was. The news traveled fast, faster than gossip usually does in a sleepy coastal town. One day, Grandpa was the man with connections, hosting guests on the patio, telling tales of his investments and European retirement dreams. The next, he was the subject of hushed conversations in bakeries, at gas stations, and along the beach path. They say he never owned the house at all. Wasn't it his grandson's from the start? I always wondered why the boy stayed so quiet. Neighbors who once smiled at Grandpa out of obligation now avoided eye contact. The landlord-like swagger he carried around town evaporated. His presence, once thunderous, turned into a shadow. Even the grocer he used to bark orders at now greeted him with cool indifference. And Marilyn, ever the picture of elegance and ambition, didn't take it well. She screamed at him the morning after the second visit from authorities. "You told me this house was yours, that it was inherited clean." Her suitcase was already packed. She slammed the bedroom door, marched down the front steps, and was gone before lunch. Not a goodbye, not a look back. Grandpa didn't chase her, maybe because he couldn't, or maybe because for the first time in his life, he had nothing to offer. Not power, not money, not a house. Now he sat alone on the same porch he once claimed as his favorite part of my property, watching as people walked by without waving. No one asked how he was doing. No one offered him sympathy. Because when the mask falls off in front of the whole town, The silence that follows is louder than any fall from grace. And this time, I didn't need to say a word. The town spoke for me. The front door creaked open the way it always had. Not loud, but just enough to whisper, "You're home." For the first time in years, the beach house stood empty. No chatter, no music, no footsteps that didn't belong. Just silence, soft and sacred. I stepped inside and let it wash over me. The walls, once burdened with tension and false ownership, now breathed freely again. Each room greeted me like an old friend. The kitchen, sunlit and quiet, still smelled faintly of clove and sea air. The hallway remembered my childhood laughter. Even the old wooden floor in the living room, the one I'd fallen on as a toddler, still held its tiny scar. I walked slowly, barefoot, feeling every grain of what beneath me. Not rushing, not fixing, just being. In the living room closet, wrapped in soft cloth, I found it, my mother's favorite portrait. She was smiling, eyes full of life, wearing the same sea blue scarf she loved. Without ceremony, I hung it back where it had always belonged. The wall seemed to sigh with relief, as if waiting all these years for her return. Outside, the garden had gone wild, vines twisting like forgotten stories. But one patch of earth near the old fence was still soft. That's where I planted the sapling. A small tree, not yet tall, but sturdy. I knelt beside it, pressing the soil with both hands. "New roots," I whispered, from old pain. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. The house wasn't a wound anymore. It was healing. Not just wood and glass. It was memory, legacy, truth. And now, peace. I found the letter on the kitchen counter, folded neatly beside a chipped mug Grandpa used to call his favorite. The handwriting was unmistakably his, sharp strokes, impatient curves. I unfolded it slowly, not expecting much. And I was right. The first lines dripped with the same bitterness he'd always carried. "You think you've won something. That silence makes you smarter. That keeping your mouth shut while I built this place into something worthwhile gave you the right to take it back. You didn't earn this. You just waited." But then, something shifted. The anger didn't fade, but it faltered. "Still, I underestimated you. I thought being quiet meant being weak. I thought your silence was the sound of surrender. But I see now. You stayed quiet, and that's what made you dangerous." That was it. No apology. No request for forgiveness. Just that one, cutting realization from a man who always believed volume equaled strength. I stood there for a moment, the breeze from the open window lifting the edge of the page. I folded the letter back up and slid it into the drawer. Not out of sentiment, but record. There was nothing left to say. Closure doesn't always come with conversations, or tears, or grand reconciliations. Sometimes, it arrives in a sentence scrawled by a man who finally saw the storm he never heard coming. I didn't write back. I didn't need to. Some truths don't need to be spoken. They just need to be lived. I stood at the edge of the beach, bare feet sinking into the wet sand as the tide rolled in, soft and steady, like a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding. The sky was a pale gold, the kind my mother used to call the color of peace. The waves shimmered beneath it, whispering lullabies to a shore that had seen too many storms. But this was mine. I looked back at the house, no longer a battleground, no longer a place of tension and trespass. Just home, windows open, curtains swaying, her portrait on the wall, watching the ocean like she used to. The walls no longer echoed with voices that didn't belong. And for the first time, it didn't feel like I was reclaiming something. It felt like it had always been waiting for me. In that quiet, I thought of Grandpa, of his sharp words, his louder-than-life presence, his hunger for control. How he had treated legacy like loot and silence like surrender. But silence had never been defeat. It had been preparation. He sold the house like it was his, boasted about it, profited from it, packed his dreams into suitcases bought with someone else's name. But what he never realized was that the only thing that truly belonged to him was his silence. Not the bricks, not the memories, not the land beneath his feet. Just the echo of his own downfall. And I, the quiet one, the shadow he dismissed, the ghost he thought would vanish, I inherited everything else. The story, the truth, the home, the legacy. I turned back to the ocean and let the wind carry my mother's scarf around my neck. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves. No more battles, no more pretending. Just peace, earned, not given. And in that moment, I knew sometimes the loudest victories come with no sound at all.